First of all, on the exam, I will give you the correlation. But the way that you read this table is if there's a black at the intersection, that means it's a correlation of 70% or 0.7 or greater.
Standard 0.7.
Yeah, 0.7 or greater. If it's gray, it's between 0.5 and 0.7. And if it's white,
Zero?
it's less than 0.5, but that's all we know.
Okay, so between...
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So I already talked about some of this. When we're designing something, we can either design workplace or we can design products. My favorite example is Japanese cars in the 50s. Okay, what a disaster they were. That's good product design. And also it still works. I mean, if we're getting larger as a population, which we are, both in girth and in stature, then we have to design products that we can use more easily. And that usually influences market status. That's why we use that for anthropometric design of products. What we're more interested in, for our purposes, is workplace design, to reduce injuries. Okay? Designing things to fit people better so that they are less likely to injure themselves, either sitting or standing or using a tool. And so that's going to be our focus. And we have to know, first of all, user population. Usually it's work age individuals, males and females, working age. We do have to accommodate a variety of ethnic groups because we have a very ethnically diverse population in this country, so you have to consider the range. Another thing, especially now, is considering geriatric populations, not to mention disabled populations. Something simple with geriatrics is that I've noticed that they've done recently is for medicine containers of various kinds, particularly things that are liquid and dispensed in droppers. It used to be that liquid, for instance, eyedroppers, I'll just use that as an example, had a cap that was probably about maybe that big. That takes a lot of dexterity and a lot more force to unscrew the top. I don't know if anybody's noticed it, but now eyedrop toppers, the tops on them that you screw off, are probably about that big, and they have flat sides, so that you don't need much dexterity. All you have to do is pinch it between your forefinger and your thumb. As long as you can pinch it in there, you can turn it off. And if it's larger, it has a bigger moment arm. Right? So it's easier to get off. So there are some considerations of things like that, especially by medicine manufacturers, and there's other areas too that you have to consider geriatric population because of smaller stature, reduced strength, and lack of dexterity. So always the bottom line, the punchline here, if you will, is that you have to know who you're designing for, who's going to be using it. And that's the primary principle of anthropometrics, is be aware of who's going to be using whatever it is that you're making. A couple of different, what I want you to get out of this is two different ideas. The first one is the idea of a clothing correction. Okay? And I want to focus on these two before we talk about everything else. Clothing correction. If you are doing something that requires special clothing, and if you were working in Antarctica, that requires special clothing. If you are working somewhere that requires shielding from nuclear, biological, or chemical agents, that requires special clothing. And you have to add a given amount, depending on the type of clothing it is, to your anthropometric measurements. That's called a clothing correction, because you've added, particularly something like a door or an access panel. If without the special clothing on, somebody can just barely walk through it. Chances are, once they get this heavy clothing on, they're not going to be able to walk through that access panel again. So you have to add an inch or whatever is appropriate for your clothing in order to accommodate them. That's the clothing correction. The other idea that's important is what's called the principle of the limiting user. Principal limiting user means that at one end of your population, there will be a user that is going to limit its functionality for everyone. So, a good example is, let's say I'm designing a scaffold. Okay. What do I want to accommodate? The 5th or the 95th percentile? 95th being the heaviest, and the 5th being the lightest. 95th, right. So that means that the 95th, but the heaviest user, the 95th percentile, is your limiting user. However, it's not always the upward range. Let's say I'm designing a cutoff switch, and I want to know how much that is for use in emergency purposes. And if 5th is the shortest and 95th is the tallest, who do I want to accommodate?
Shortest.
Shortest, the 5th. So that in that case, the 5th percentile is the limiting user. So you have to consider who would be, what end of the distribution would be harmed in some way if you didn't accommodate them. And so if I design a scaffolding for the 50th or the 5th percentile, even worse, then I'm going to be harming the 95th percentile. If I'm designing the cutoff switch for the 95th, the tallest person, then I'm going to be harming the 5th percentile because they can't get to it when they need to. Okay? And there are a lot of different examples like that. You very rarely design for your average user. That's almost never advisable. Not that it's not done, but it's almost never advisable. What you usually want to try to do is design for your limiting user if you can't adjust it. And with the clothing correction, I can kind of put this out of order. These are the type of things that you really want to consider. Walking, crawling, and ingress and egress will have a special importance for our clothing correction adjustments. These are some more examples. Like I said, it's not that the average user isn't used, but a countertop height, and most of our kitchens are around 3 feet, and they vary a little bit, and they accommodate pretty much nobody. Right? If you're a little bit tall, you get a backache working at it, and if you're a little bit on the short side, you get your shoulders hurt from reaching up for it, because you have to work like this while you're standing at the kitchen counter. So they really don't work for anybody, but that's what happens when you use the average user. And here's my extreme users are things like door jams. Well, you want to accommodate 95th percentile, and also if you can have the luxury of adjustment, then you want to try to accommodate 5th or 95th. The thing that we use every day that is most capable of being adjusted is what you're sitting in right now, is the chair. And these chairs actually are pretty adjustable. And most of you figured out how to adjust everything on them yet. But it takes a while. I mean, because I know most of them, but where was I? This. The things that you can adjust are height, tilt, the seat pan. Did you know that you can slide the seat pan front and back if you want to? You can have tension, whether it reclines or not, and then tension, and also armrest width and height. For chairs, that's not bad. And chairs in the classroom, they're better than the torture devices that are in the classroom. We're in here, actually. They used the same ones in here up until just a few years ago. They replaced them with these. And now they don't let us have graduate classes starting next semester.
What?
Go figure. Anyway, well, next semester, human factors is going to be in that room. I couldn't get this room, believe it or not.
That's good.
So you're going to, so whoever's taking human factors next semester,
Enjoy.
you're going to have to sit in
No,
this
the
chair
undergrad is
for
pushing us
3
out.
hours.
That's happening.
We told you they were the shit.
What's that?
Can we move them over there?
I would if I were you. I can't tell you to do that, but that's. I'd certainly come in here and get one
Possible
in a
tonight.
3-hour session.
We'll just edit that part out.
So, I skipped ahead a little bit there. But, so seated work surfaces, because we spend so much of our time sitting on our butts doing things, are really actually pretty important. And there are some companies that are pretty expensive that have adjustable work surface heights. They have really good chairs. These are pretty good chairs. There's a type of chair called this. There's a couple of different. It has a lot of intrigue associated with it. There was a guy at Texas Tech who, for his dissertation, designed the perfect ergonomic chair, and it really was. It's really quite good. I'll describe it in a minute. And he opened a company and started selling them after he graduated. And he's right now he's probably retired by now. He was on the faculty at Texas A&M, and he opened his own company. Then he made the apparent mistake of hiring his sons, who then, when they became old enough, did a hostile takeover of his own company and forced him out. And so now they inherited his name, which I think is called Ergo-Built or something like that. And so he went off and established his own company, selling virtually the same product. And so now he's in competition with his sons selling the same thing, interestingly enough. But anyway, these chairs that they made were really quite good, because what his whole idea was, okay, if you see somebody in zero gravity, an astronaut in the space station, in zero gravity, what are they doing? They're floating along, not straight, like when they're standing, and also not sitting with at 90 degrees. What are they doing? They're floating kind of like this, with their legs at an obtuse angle to the torso, and their lower leg kind of hanging down. So he said, that's probably the most natural position to be in. That's the position you assume during in zero gravity. So he made chairs that you can tilt the seat pan forward, and then the seat pan is designed in such a way that it has a bladder in the middle that fits between your knees, that you can inflate and deflate to accommodate the size of your thighs and the size of your buttocks. So you sit in it, you adjust that bladder, and then you tilt the seat pan forward so that you're in this neutral position. And then there's a lumbar bladder that you can inflate. It's a very complicated piece of machinery, actually, but they're quite good. I think Bill has one. There was one floating around here that they bought a number of years ago, and he was at the right place when the guy moved out that had it. So, surprise, surprise, right? And so anyway, if you look at the seat that Bill has in there, that's actually one of these things. And so, it does all these great adjustments, and it's really one of the best ergonomic chairs. However, very few people, that's why we only have one in this building, is because a guy that had a grant, and he bought it with his grant. They cost about $2,500 a piece. They did anyway. They're probably more by now. But they're very, very expensive pieces of equipment, so you won't see them around a lot. When we're designing a work surface, one of the first things you want to think about is your chair. So you can adjust the height, but then if you adjust the height of the chair so that you're comfortable, what's the likelihood that your thighs are going to hit the bottom of your work surface? Pretty good. How many of you, when you sit properly and have your chair adjusted the way you want it, try to pull into the work surface and the tops of your thighs hit the work surface? Well, that's why the work surface should be adjustable as well. Right? Ideally, you should have a work surface that you can move up and down. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about the health benefits of a standing work surface. I suppose if you get up and sit down a lot, that might be okay, but then you're lacking the exercise of getting up and sitting down, which I think has some health benefit too. It's more of a convenience than anything. But nevertheless, you still have to have your work surface adjusted, and for the most part, you have to call somebody from facilities at most places that you will work in order to adjust the height of your desk. You can do it, but it takes a major undertaking to do that. You can't flip a button or pump a lever or something like that to adjust it. It's not easy to do, but it should be, okay? Because if you get your chair right, chances are your work surface isn't going to be right. The other thing, I'll wait to talk about that. So the idea being is that you can't design something that's fixed and expect it to work for virtually anybody. If it's adjustable, that's the best way to get it to work for everybody. And we have a dearth of adjustability in most places that we go and use. I think I talked about this. Forward tilting seat pan, lumbar support, because you got to support the natural curvature, especially if you're in this neutral posture. You still have a natural curvature in your lower back, so you have to have lumbar support. And armrests. And interestingly enough, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but interestingly enough, whenever most chair companies, and I was on the reason I know more than I should about chairs is one place I worked, I got hooked into being on the corporate chair committee. It sounds irrelevant, doesn't it? But that's where I was, on the corporate chair committee. And so, who spends the most time sitting in a chair? The admins, right?
Yeah.
So what do they give, so what do most chair companies market to admins? These tiny little stools that you have to balance on top of that are called task chairs, whereas the executives who spend no time sitting have these huge, elaborate, comfortable chairs to sit in, and they spend no time sitting in them. It should be the opposite. I mean, because the executives don't sit in their chairs, at least if not if they want to keep their jobs. They get up and they run around doing things. The secretaries are the ones, the admins are the ones that have to sit there all day typing on the phone and everything. They're the ones that should have the elaborate chairs. I don't know, but it just goes to show you that it has more to do with status than it does with functionality, right? So anyway, you should have support for that. It was just a rant on the side there. I was talking about armrests. That's what reminded me. It's because task chairs never have armrests. They should have their arms supported while they're typing, right? Otherwise, they're just hanging there, and they have all sorts of actually cervical problems. And I'll show you some examples of that I ran into here. So anyway, that's some of the things that chairs should have. That's what your chairs do. And the way you're doing this, I just tossed this in here to remind you that this is the kind of things you might want to measure if you're designing the optimal workstation. This is what I'm talking about. I pulled this off the internet just to show you. And here they show the typical admin. She has no armrest here at all. Look at this tiny little chair. I mean, it hardly accommodates anybody. It doesn't have much, it's very inexpensive. It has no padding on it. And yet that's the standard for admins, a task chair. Okay. Some of these other adjustments here that they suggest are actually reasonable. A footrest, if you have a properly designed workstation, you probably shouldn't need a footrest. If you need a footrest, you've done something else wrong. You're just making up for a mistake you made elsewhere. But they always use a footrest because they're bound to make a mistake somewhere when they design these things. Now I wanted to show you as a final parting word, some workstation evaluations that I did here on campus. And I discreetly blanked out their faces so you won't know who they are. But this name tags on the next slide. This is a typical. I told her I said, get yourself in a typical posture while you're working. And this is what it was. Okay, she had the phone crooked here, and she was trying to type like this. Okay, while she was working. Notice here, you can't really see it very well, but there's an armrest here. I hate armrests, or wrist rests. Because wrist rests, what they're supposed to be for, is when you're not doing anything, you can rest, just what it says, a wrist rest. You rest your wrist there. What does everybody do? It's a wrist rest, and I gotta use it. So they cram their wrists onto it and then try to type like this. That's exactly what she was doing. More people than not do that. So take them away. If they're not gonna use them right, take them away. So that's what she was doing. And then this thing was all the way across the desk. I mean, this doesn't show you how distant this thing was, that she really couldn't see it very well. Even though, this is my second visit. And the reason for it is because she was accommodating her documents there. So she pushed the monitor way back so that there was accommodate the documents, so she looked back and forth. You should have a document holder to the side, ideally. It's no harder to look to the side than it is down when you're doing work. This was my second visit. Here you can see an articulated arm behind here that was meant to adjust the monitor so it was closer and make it easier to adjust. Well, I wasn't there when they installed it. So what did the guys in facilities do? Well, they went over there and they installed it as far away from her as they could possibly get it because they felt it was out of the way. That wasn't the idea. So I had them uninstall it and move it up so that she could actually get this closer. This was as close as she could get it where it was installed because they put it so they mounted the brace so far away from the user. So that's a couple of observations there. That's just a different angle, telephone, typical way most people use their telephone, no matter how much they do it. And by the way, she had a compressed thoracic disc. Well, guess what that was from? Doing that all day, all the time. Surgery for it, actually. Not thoracic, I'm sorry, cervical. And this is where they mounted it as far as they could get away. And then this was stretched all the way out and still wasn't close enough, so I had to move it out here further.
You should probably cover her name tag too.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Nobody else would say Dang. Well, for next time. So that was the monitor arm, wireless headset, document holder. Really easy stuff, but nobody thinks about it. I mean, you go out there, you look at their workstation, and they're doing bizarre things. We had an admin here prior to Kathy. That she said, I can't imagine why my shoulder hurts all the time. I went in there, she had the keyboard down on a tray, and the mouse was on top of the CPU, and this is where she was using the mouse. I can't imagine why she had shoulder pain. You know? One other thing, people who are smaller can't get access, typically. This person, she was about, I think about 5'2", on the small side. She couldn't find a chair, so you can't see it really well here, but the armrests weren't adjustable, they were all but broken. Again, look at the wrist rest. She has her wrist crammed down on the wrist rest. She had this, she adjusted her chair because this wasn't adjustable, and her feet are dangling. And typically not in a neutral posture because of that stupid wrist rest. Okay, and like I said, you have to get a new chair. And I don't know whether she ever managed to get one. I made a recommendation. I can't make anybody buy anything for people. And this is, again, this is the way that she had to sit because she was smaller and she couldn't get a decent chair. Plus the fact that the top of the desk wasn't adjustable. So this is an instance where a footrest really is necessary because even if she got a chair that was properly adjustable, the height of the work surface wouldn't accommodate her. So the only thing she can do is put a footrest there. So they have their uses, but you have to be careful about how you use them. The seat pan was so deep because this chair was so large because she just hunted around until she found a chair that was available, that in order to use the keyboard, she had to sit forward so there was absolutely no lumbar support. And she had lumbar back problems, interestingly enough. Not to mention some adductor pollicis and abductor pollicis problems because she used the mouse, she was ambidextrous, used the mouse with both hands and therefore just distributed the pain to both hands. So she had bilateral. This is pretty much what I said. So I said smaller chair. You can actually, with chairs, once again, benefit of my corporate chair committee experience, you can buy different cylinders. People don't know that, but there are, for even a standard chair, you can get a standard cylinder, a short cylinder, or a tall cylinder. And you can also get chair options as far as size. Above 95th, below 5th. The chair sizes are available. Okay. That's all I have to say to you guys. Any questions? Finally, shut up.
That's not what I said! From the words of my mouth.
Yes.
It's more a comment than a question. Back home now, a lot of companies, they force you to do workspace, occupational health and safety training before they hire you.
Mm-hmm.
You won't pay attention to it and you won't even care. I mean, you just go through just to get it over with and get your contract signed.
Mm-hmm.
But I have retained some of that stuff. I don't think I put it into practice much though, but it may help a little bit.
That's interesting because they don't require, well actually some places do require ergonomic and workstation design, and nobody realizes the importance of it, and that's the problem that they have. Is you can train people all you want, but until you have a demonstration of the difference, you can't. And so what you have to have is kind of like this, this roving ergonomist that goes around and sort of taps people on the shoulder and says, "You should adjust your workstation. You should adjust your chair." But getting people to do it is very difficult without mandating actually an evaluation of the workstation. And that's interesting that they require that.
But still going through the training people doesn't really pay.
No, training is usually not very efficacious. It's really, okay.
I didn't even think about it. When I got hired with the City of Prescott, they did that, and it was literally just a sheet that they hand you, and it was like they printed it off the website.
Yeah.
HR did it. No, they didn't have somebody come in and look at the workstation.
That's the worst.
So
that's the worst thing is that safety, ergonomics, and safety in general often gets fobbed off on HR.
Yeah.
Who is least qualified that you can think of with ergonomics and safety? I probably shouldn't have said that, but I did.
Here.